Was praying. Linda Arndt had said to me, we're hopeful that the kidnappers will just drop JonBenét off someplace. And I kept looking out the window, clutching this cross and just imagining that she was going to come running down the street.
I immediately knelt down over her and I ran upstairs and laid her on the floor and still had a hope that she was alive.
JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old girl, was discovered lifeless in the basement of her family home. A bizarre ransom note was left behind, but no one ever called to collect. There were no signs of a forced entry, no unidentified DNA. Only the family was home, including her 9-year-old brother, Burke Ramsey, the last person to have seen JonBenét alive. His fingerprints were on a bowl of pineapple. His knife was found near her body, and a voice believed to be his was heard at the end of the emergency call. Yet, in Netflix's 2024 series, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey? Burke is barely mentioned. One has to ask why. What narrative was being protected, and what truly unfolded on Christmas night, 1996? Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. In November 2024, Netflix released a true crime docuseries from Oscar-nominated filmmaker Joe Berlinger, promising a deep re-examination of one of America's most haunting cases. The series aimed to scrutinize the mishandling of the scene and highlight how the media frenzy shaped public perception. Berlinger made it clear from the outset that he did not believe the Ramsey family was involved. Instead, he emphasized the need to use advanced forensic DNA tools to identify an intruder and finally clear the family's name. But the strangest thing about the series is its treatment of Burke Ramsey, the only other child in the house that night. Despite being the last known person to see JonBenét alive, Burke's name is referenced only briefly, without depth or context. There is no in-depth analysis of his behavior, his statements, or the physical evidence tied to him. For a series claiming to investigate the case from every angle, this omission stands out like a scream in a quiet room. What exactly was left out? For starters, the 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey has long been a subject of intense scrutiny. Enhanced audio appears to reveal a third voice at the end of the call, a voice many experts believe is Burke's. If true, this directly contradicts his parents' claim that he was asleep throughout the entire ordeal. Then there's the infamous bowl of pineapple found on the kitchen table bearing Burke's fingerprints and found partially digested in JonBenét's stomach. This small detail has always raised large questions. Did the siblings have a late-night snack? Did something go terribly wrong? More troubling is the red Swiss Army knife, Burke's knife, reportedly hidden by the housekeeper due to his whittling habit. That same knife was later found near JonBenét's body in the basement, with no explanation ever provided. Equally unsettling are reports of Burke's disturbing behavior as a child, including a pattern of smearing excrement on walls and candy boxes, showing signs of emotional detachment, and displaying unusual reactions during interviews. None of this is touched upon in the Netflix series. Nor does the series mention the defamation lawsuits filed by the Ramsey family against media outlets and experts who publicly suggested Burke's involvement. CBS, which produced a 2016 docuseries implicating Burke more directly, was sued by him for $150 million, a lawsuit that ended in a confidential settlement. The message was clear: scrutinize Burke, and you may pay a heavy legal price. Perhaps this is why Netflix chose silence. Notably absent from the series are experts like Dr. Werner Spitz, who openly questioned Burke's possible role, as well as FBI profiler James R. Fitzgerald and forensic scientist Henry Lee, all of whom have raised serious doubts about the official narrative. Instead, the production centers its story on an unidentified intruder, painting the family as victims of a media witch hunt. This editorial decision appears to be a deliberate choice, one possibly driven by legal caution or pressure from the Ramsey legal team. Ever since his unsettling 2016 television appearance, where his constant smiling and vague answers alarmed many viewers, public suspicion toward him has only grown. If Burke speaks, people accuse him of deception. If he stays silent, he is seen as hiding something. And yet, the documentary's omission only fuels more questions. Why is a key figure in the case treated like a footnote? Why do his fingerprints on the pineapple, his knife near the body, and his potential voice on the 911 call seem to matter so little to the filmmakers? Berlinger's style is known for championing those he believes are wrongly accused. But in doing so, has he inadvertently suppressed one of the most controversial angles of the case? Has the pursuit of a sympathetic narrative buried a vital lead? Critics argue that the series fails to present any new evidence and leans heavily on disproving the intruder theory rather than exploring viable alternatives. Burke's near-total absence is the elephant in the room. This isn't just a storytelling flaw. It's a hole in the heart of the investigation. Viewers deserved, at the very least, a mention of Burke's knife, a timeline involving the pineapple, and an explanation for the third voice on the tape. These are not minor facts. They are potential clues. In choosing not to address them, the documentary may have offered comfort, but not necessarily truth. The real question then becomes, if the story Netflix told was only half the truth, what's the other half they were too afraid to show? Burke Ramsey was the firstborn child of John and Patsy Ramsey, arriving 3 years before his sister. At 9 years old, Burke occupied a quiet, almost invisible space within the family's large home in Boulder, Colorado. His bedroom was on the top floor, while JonBenét slept on the second floor, closer to the center of attention. This physical separation mirrored an emotional distance. Unlike his sister, a child beauty pageant queen, Burke shied away from the spotlight. His mother, Patsy, a former pageant queen herself, invested immense energy into grooming JonBenét for competitions, leaving much of the household's attention to revolve around her. Burke, by contrast, was often left to his world of video games and Lego. Those close to the family described him as a boy who spent most of his time isolated. He didn't seem to express feelings in a typical way, and psychological evaluations later described him as under-socialized. This emotional flatness may have been a defense mechanism or a symptom of something deeper. What raises further concern is that Burke wasn't just detached. He displayed a pattern of troubling and at times aggressive behavior long before his sister's passing. One of the most widely discussed signs was his recurrent history of smearing feces on walls, bathroom surfaces, and even on a Christmas gift meant for JonBenét. In child psychology, such behavior is considered a major red flag, often suggesting unresolved anger or a desire to assert control where a child feels powerless. Adding to this concern is the well-documented incident where Burke struck JonBenét in the face with a golf club, leaving a visible scar. The parents claimed it was an accident, but investigators saw it as potential evidence of underlying aggression. Testimonies also described him as a child who would lash out if things didn't go his way. Then there's Burke's fixation with sharp objects, including the red Swiss Army knife that the housekeeper felt compelled to hide for safety reasons. On the morning of December 26, 1996, when Patsy Ramsey discovered the ransom note, she called 911. During that call, and in the initial moments of panic, Burke was reportedly asleep upstairs. According to his parents, he slept through the night. Patsy stated she did not wake him. meaning Burke remained uninvolved during the first critical stages. When police arrived, Burke was not present in the main living spaces. He remained upstairs, shielded from the investigation. He was not questioned that morning by responding officers. As the search for JonBenét continued, Burke stayed isolated. He was not present when his father and a family friend, Fleet White, descended into the basement and discovered JonBenét's body. Throughout this time, Burke remained away from the core areas of the investigation. One of the first notable omissions came from Fleet White, who, in his recounting of the morning's events, never once mentioned Burke. This raised early questions. Was Burke being intentionally kept away from everyone, and if so, why? That morning, Burke was reportedly given breakfast, fast food from McDonald's, by another family friend, removing him from the environment. At a time when officers were working to understand a potential kidnapping, isolating the only other child in the house seemed, at best, overly protective, and at worst, calculated. Further complicating the timeline were Patsy Ramsey's shifting accounts. In some interviews, she claimed Burke was never awakened, yet in others, she recounted him asking, "What's going on?" This inconsistency hints that he may have been aware of far more than was initially acknowledged. These questions grow louder when paired with forensic audio analysis of the 911 call. In the final seconds, a 6-second snippet revealed what many experts believe to be 3 voices: Patsy, John, and a child, possibly Burke. Patsy is heard saying something that sounds like, "What did you do?" John is heard saying, "We're not speaking to you," followed by a faint child's voice. According to retired investigator James Kohler, author of Foreign Faction, internal reports suggested the FBI deemed it highly probable that the child's voice was Burke's. While never officially confirmed, the implication is significant. If Burke was speaking after the call ended, then he was awake and within earshot, contradicting his family's claims that he had slept through everything. Burke was not formally interviewed by police and was kept from investigators during the first 48 hours, before being questioned in a controlled setting accompanied by attorneys and child psychologists hired by the Ramseys. For law enforcement, this was highly irregular. In most cases involving a missing child, every person in the home would be quickly and independently questioned, regardless of age. Burke's separation from the investigative process was a glaring deviation from protocol. The explanation offered by the Ramseys was that they were protecting their son, but the degree of control exerted over his environment, his interactions, and even his breakfast suggests more than protection. It suggests orchestration. The idea that Burke slept through the entire morning continues to be questioned. The Ramsey home was large but not soundproof. An emergency call was made. There were raised voices, and there was movement. Many experts find it implausible that a 9-year-old would remain asleep through it all. It matters because Burke's presence, or lack thereof, influences the timeline. A child who is genuinely confused or scared might exhibit clear emotional responses. Burke, however, was removed, isolated, and absent. This separation coincides with several anomalies from both parents that same morning. Patsy Ramsey claimed to have discovered the ransom note almost immediately upon waking. She called 911 within minutes, yet despite the intensity of the situation, she appeared fully dressed, made up and composed when police arrived. Investigators later remarked that this level of readiness was highly unusual. Similarly, John Ramsey's actions came under scrutiny. While instructed to search the home earlier, he did not do so until several hours later. It was there, in the basement, that JonBenét was found. Yet rather than leave the scene intact, John picked her up and brought her upstairs, contaminating potential evidence. The broader picture paints a peculiar symmetry. Patsy placed the 911 call, John discovered the body, and Burke slept, later to be escorted away. Each person in the house had a defined role. Nothing overlapped. No one contradicted the others. To many investigators, this level of coordination appeared more like stagecraft than a spontaneous family emergency. Around 1:00 p.m., on December 26, 1996, JonBenét Ramsey was discovered in the basement of the home. Several pieces of physical evidence found have been connected to Burke. One of the most scrutinized clues is the bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table. It contained pineapple and milk, and Burke's fingerprints were found on it. The autopsy showed that JonBenét had undigested pineapple in her stomach, strongly suggesting she had eaten it shortly before her life ended. The logical conclusion was that Burke and JonBenét had been in the kitchen together, sharing a late-night snack. If true, this could place Burke as the last person to see his sister alive. This detail was notably downplayed in early reports. What complicates this further is Burke's own account, which claimed he had been asleep. But the pineapple evidence, combined with the child's voice on the 911 call, tells a different story. Moving to the basement, investigators found more unsettling signs. Traces of human feces in the area near where JonBenét lay. Given Burke's prior incidents involving fecal smearing, this discovery is not merely disturbing, but potentially illuminating. Then there is the knife. A small, red pocket knife, used by Burke for whittling, was found on the floor near JonBenét. The family's housekeeper had previously hidden the knife due to safety concerns. That it reappeared in the basement, right next to a child whose life had been tragically cut short, is a fact that has never been fully explained. A black Maglite flashlight was also found in the house, a tool many experts believe could have caused the head injury found on JonBenét. Its size, weight, and blunt surface matched the depressed skull fracture. It was wiped clean of fingerprints, suggesting a deliberate effort to remove evidence. While there is no proof Burke wielded it, he was known to play with flashlights. Finally, there is the physical evidence found on JonBenét herself. 2 small, circular abrasions that would fuel one of the case's most controversial theories. The marks on her lower back and near her neck were initially theorized by some to have been caused by a stun gun. This supported the idea of an intruder. However, this theory began to unravel. Forensic pathologists pointed out that the marks showed no signs of electrical burns. Instead, the wounds were clean, consistent in diameter, and matched almost exactly the spacing between the metal prongs of a toy train track. This brought attention to a metal train set belonging to Burke Ramsey. The toy, commonly played with by Burke in the basement, had track pieces whose metal rails aligned perfectly with the dimensions of the abrasions. The theory developed that the injuries may have been inflicted by someone pressing the end of the toy track against her skin. Netflix's 2024 docuseries notably excludes any mention of this toy train track evidence. This omission adds to the broader perception that its narrative was carefully curated to downplay or ignore elements that might implicate Burke. Adding to this strangeness is the lack of any visible emotional reaction from him. There are no photos, videos, or testimonies describing him crying or asking questions. Even more curiously, Burke was absent from public events surrounding his sister's passing. He did not attend the public memorial services and was not seen at the funeral. This isolation extended to psychological care. Burke did not receive immediate counseling. It wasn't until days later, under the coordination of family attorneys, that any professional support was introduced. All records of Burke's behavior from this time forward were managed exclusively by the Ramsey legal team. There are no reports of him keeping any mementos of JonBenét, no favorite toy, no shared photos. There are also no accounts of Patsy or John physically comforting him. His role that day resembles that of someone in quarantine, seen as a legal variable to be managed, not a child who had just lost his sister. An officer present in the house noted that Burke, even after reportedly being told of his sister's death, showed no outward signs of emotion. While this may not be definitive proof of anything, it is certainly not the typical behavior of a 9-year-old. What makes these pieces more than coincidence is how they add up. Burke's fingerprints on the bowl, the undigested pineapple, the missing emotional reaction, the knife in the basement, the flashlight with no prints, the feces, the legal shielding, and the media silence. No single element alone implicates Burke Ramsey, but collectively they construct a haunting pattern that suggests more went on that night than has ever been officially acknowledged. In the 2024 Netflix series, despite this body of evidence, Burke was barely mentioned. The series focused instead on stranger-intruder theories, dismissing or ignoring much of the circumstantial evidence tied to the person who lived in the same house and who had prior behavioral red flags. Whether Burke was truly involved or merely the unfortunate subject of public suspicion, one thing is clear. The evidence surrounding him saw far less attention than it received. The silence, both emotional and investigative, around Burke Ramsey is perhaps the loudest clue of all. The question lingers, not just what happened to JonBenét Ramsey, but why did no one truly look at Burke? In the immediate aftermath of JonBenét's passing, from December 27th to December 31st, 1996, no formal interviews were conducted with Burke. The Ramsey family, acting on legal advice, refused to make him available to police at a time when critical details could have been fresh in his memory. Law enforcement would later call this delay a serious setback. It wasn't until January 6, 1997, 11 days after JonBenét was found, that Burke was officially interviewed. That first interview took place under tightly controlled conditions with family lawyers present. Burke stuck to a single story. He had been asleep the entire night and heard nothing. His answers were short, guarded, and emotionally flat. More than a year later, in June 1998, Burke was interviewed again as part of grand jury proceedings. Observers noted his unusual emotional detachment. Even when shown photographs of the scene in the basement, Burke did not flinch, express sadness, or ask questions. Experts in child psychology commented on how uncommon it was for a child to speak so dispassionately about a sibling's tragic loss. There were no tears, no evident grief, just calm, measured responses. At the same time, the family arranged for Burke to begin sessions with Dr. Suzanne Bernard, a clinical psychologist. According to her assessments, Burke showed signs of emotional blunting. He didn't cry when speaking about his sister. He described the events as if they had happened to someone else. When asked if someone had taught him how to lie, Burke responded, "Nope," and immediately pivoted the conversation to Legos. In one session, he drew a detailed map of the house, including the wine cellar, the very room where JonBenét was found. This raised eyebrows, as the family had claimed Burke had never been in that room before. Even more disturbing was his response to a question about the meaning of death. Burke said simply, "If someone's dead, you bury them. That's what you do." The cold, matter-of-fact tone shocked the professionals. Throughout his sessions, he consistently refused to talk about the morning of December 26th, offering the same line each time. "I was asleep." He never asked, "Where is she?" or "Who did this?" That absence of curiosity was deeply unusual. In September 2016, nearly 20 years after his sister's passing, Burke broke his long-held silence in a multi-part interview on the Dr. Phil show. His stated reason was to clear his name. He denied any involvement and insisted he had been sleeping. But it wasn't just his words that drew attention. It was how he said them. Throughout the interview, Burke frequently smiled, even while describing traumatic events. When Dr. Phil addressed it, Burke explained he was nervous. Dr. Phil himself later suggested Burke might suffer from social anxiety. When asked directly, "Did you harm your sister?" Burke replied, "Nope." Still, many viewers found his demeanor deeply puzzling. Experts noted his emotional reactions appeared disconnected from the gravity of the subject. While some saw a shy man struggling, others saw signs of emotional detachment or, worse, deception. The interview's timing was no coincidence. It aired around the same time CBS released a documentary hypothesizing that Burke might have accidentally harmed JonBenét. The Dr. Phil interview appeared to many as a counteroffensive, a carefully orchestrated PR campaign. Dr. Phil later confirmed Burke's legal team had full oversight. The fallout was far from over. Within months, the Ramsey family filed a massive $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS, which was eventually settled out of court. Critics also noted that Burke never expressed curiosity about the perpetrator. This lack of engagement, some argued, could indicate trauma-induced suppression. Others, however, pointed to it as a red flag. The controlled nature of Burke's media debut and his unusual affect fueled more questions than answers. Theories go beyond suggesting that Burke accidentally caused JonBenét's death and was then protected by his parents. Some propose scenarios stretching far beyond what a 9-year-old might be capable of. One such theory is known as playing doctor. It emerged not from official records, but from public speculation and the work of independent investigators like James Kohler. In his book, Foreign Faction, Kohler suggested that certain behavioral and forensic clues might point toward an inappropriate but non-criminal interaction between the two children. An idea centered not on malicious intent or adult-level harm, but on the possibility that Burke engaged in a boundary-crossing act of curiosity, the kind sometimes seen in unsupervised sibling dynamics. Some forensic reports noted minor injuries of a private nature on JonBenét that did not align with a traditional adult assault. Experts have theorized that these marks could have been caused by a small object. It's essential to note that no one in law enforcement ever formally accused Burke of inappropriate touching. But the evidence raised a question. Were these injuries the result of a curiosity-driven game gone wrong? The context implied someone may have tried to cover up an event that was inappropriate, if not overtly criminal. There's also troubling context from Burke's past. According to reports, he had a history of smearing feces on JonBenét's toys and bedroom walls. While disturbing, such actions could reflect deeper emotional disturbances, potentially jealousy or a need for control. This background adds weight to the theory that something which crossed personal boundaries may have occurred between the two children that night. The strongest circumstantial link was the bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table, with Burke's fingerprints. JonBenét had partially digested pineapple in her stomach, meaning she had eaten it not long before her death. The working theory is that the two were together late at night, and what started as a snack may have led to an argument or play that went too far. Medical examiners noted that the injuries were fresh, but didn't bleed significantly, making many question whether they came from a forceful adult attacker. The absence of any adult male DNA also weakened the theory of an outside predator. Meanwhile, the detailed cleaning of the area is seen as particularly suspicious, as if someone tried to erase evidence of something inappropriate. When interviewed, Burke consistently avoided discussing that night, often steering conversations toward video games. He denied going into the basement, yet later sketched the wine cellar accurately during a psychological session. Such contradictions only added to suspicions. To be clear, this remains a speculative theory. No witness or physical evidence definitively proves it. Still, when considering the nature of the injuries, the cleaning of evidence, and the eerie detachment Burke showed, it's not hard to see why this theory has persisted. Another theory stands apart, not for accusing Burke Ramsey of wrongdoing, but for painting him too as a victim. It suggests Burke may have been subject to a highly controlled, repressive environment that shaped his responses. His emotional inconsistency, smiling while recalling traumatic details, is interpreted by some child psychologists as a sign of detachment, often seen in children who have experienced early emotional suppression. His choice of words was equally telling. He described JonBenét as the one who always messes with my stuff, a cold characterization. His prior boundary-violating behavior, like smearing feces, could be a symptom of a child replicating what they had experienced themselves, a form of reenactment. This doesn't automatically point to harm, but is common in case studies of children exposed to intense family dysfunction. Burke's descriptions of events lacked emotional engagement. He recounted the story as though it had happened to someone else. This type of dissociation is a common coping mechanism for unresolved emotional pain. Following JonBenét's death, he was immediately separated from the scene and shielded from law enforcement by his parents and legal team. No independent psychological support was recorded during the critical first days. The tight, unyielding grip the Ramseys had over Burke's exposure has been interpreted by many as protective, but a question remains. Was it to shield him from the media, or to prevent uncomfortable truths from emerging? Strikingly, there was an absence of visible parental comfort given to Burke. No records showed John or Patsy holding or comforting their only surviving child. This emotional distancing, some experts believe, could indicate that Burke's emotional needs were consistently minimized. While no official source has ever labeled Burke a victim of a dysfunctional environment, some have proposed he showed traits consistent with children raised in highly repressive households where a polished public image is paramount. The Ramsey family, known for presenting a picture-perfect life, may have fostered a "don't talk about it" culture, teaching Burke to bury his own pain. Their history of aggressively litigating against any media that painted Burke in a negative light, including the $750 million lawsuit against CBS, suggests a family deeply invested in controlling the narrative. From the earliest days of the investigation, Burke Ramsey has never been officially charged or named as a suspect. Yet, in the court of public opinion, he has remained at the center of suspicion. This was built by three key forces: investigative gaps, media obsession, and a public hungry for closure. Burke was not questioned the day his sister was found. That silence left a void, and the public filled it with theories. The media framed him as the quiet, strange kid in the shadows. His 2016 interview, meant to clear his name, only added fuel to the fire. We expect children who lose siblings to be visibly devastated, but Burke didn't do any of that. He spoke of JonBenét like a classmate, not a sister. When reactions don't make sense, people often assume the worst. The result is a perfect storm. A child who behaved strangely, parents who shut down access, and a media machine hungry for a villain. Even if Burke is innocent, those forces created an image that's almost impossible to erase. In a case with no confessions and no conclusive evidence, suspicion thrives on behavior, not facts, and Burke's behavior never fit the narrative people were hoping for. The JonBenét Ramsey case stands as a haunting example of how tragedy, media, and public suspicion can intertwine. It showed what happens when an investigation is compromised from the beginning, making the truth harder to reach. We also learned how damaging public speculation can be. Burke Ramsey, only 9 years old, became a suspect for decades, not because of direct evidence, but because of how he acted. Most importantly, the case taught us to look deeper at how we handle child trauma. Whether Burke was a victim, a witness, or just a grieving brother, the system offered him little protection from scrutiny. In the end, the case is a reminder that justice isn't just about finding a perpetrator. It's about protecting the innocent, honoring the departed with truth, and resisting the urge to turn pain into a spectacle. As this complex and sorrowful story comes to a close, we are left standing in a landscape of unanswered questions and fractured truths. Do you see a family tragedy compounded by a failed investigation, or a carefully constructed narrative designed to hide a terrible secret? After weighing the evidence, the behaviors, and the decades of silence, where do you believe the truth lies? This case challenges our very understanding of grief, trauma, and justice, and it compels us to ask what we would do, what we should all do, to ensure that a child's story is never again lost in the noise. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.